Good morning, boys and girls. It's Miss Deanna Davies here, and we are going to be having chapel online. It's going to be fun. Mr. Davies asked me to do it, and I'm very excited about it. We were going to do some missionary stories, but then I decided to read another book that my children love called Escape Underground. It's very exciting. I think you'll really enjoy it. So, besides that, I thought we could read something about God's amazing creatures. My dad gave me this book at Christmas time, and it's very interesting. So I'm going to start with the American alligator. We did not have alligators in Africa. We had crocodiles. They are different. They look a little different. One thing that's very exciting is that Scripture is filled with lessons from creation, and a lot of times God uses animals to point us toward Himself. Even though it seems a simple thing, it's very exciting. The Bible even talks about some animals. It says in Proverbs 6:6, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." What are some ways we can learn from the ant? Well, they're always busy. They're always being productive. Another verse, Romans 1:20 says, "For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." We are without excuse. When we see what God's created, we can learn from it. Proverbs 19:1-3 says, "Better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Also that the soul be without knowledge is not good, and he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. The foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord." The American alligator. The American alligator is a large semi-aquatic, carnivorous, that means it eats meat, freshwater reptile that lives in the warm southeastern parts of the United States, with the largest populations in Florida, Mississippi, and Louisiana. The name is from the Spanish El Rato, meaning big lizard, which is what the Spanish explorers called the creature. The alligator can be distinguished from a crocodile by its broad U-shaped snout as opposed to the narrow V-shaped snout of the croc. The alligator was endangered in the 1950s due to the market for its skin, which means people used to kill them, skin them, and make them into boots and purses and all kinds of things. But it has made a huge comeback since being placed under government protection. There are an estimated 2 million alligators in Louisiana and Florida alone. The largest alligator on record was a Louisiana specimen over 19 feet long. It's like if you would take Mr. Davies and put him on the floor and measure him, and then stack him on top of himself and measure him again. He'd be even bigger than that. The heaviest was a Florida gator weighing over 1,000 pounds. 2 gators weighing about 725 pounds were killed on the same day in Mississippi in September 2013. They have been known to live more than 75 years. That's longer than some people. The alligator's respiratory system is like that of a bird, with the air moving in a unidirectional manner through its lung system. The alligator has a valve in the back of its throat that closes when it submerges and thus prevents water from entering its lungs. It is a cold-blooded creature and must sun itself to maintain proper body temperature. That means if it's cold, it doesn't move a lot. If it's warm, it can move. They remain dormant if the temperature is below 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 degrees Celsius. And during winter months, they often live in underground burrows, though they come out or emerge to bask in the sun. Its tail forms half of its length and serves many functions, propelling it through the water, acting as a weapon, and storing fat that the alligator uses for nourishment during times when it cannot feed. A large male alligator can bite with a massive force of more than 2,900 pounds. This is the most powerful bite force ever measured, more than the force of a mid-sized car falling on top of someone. In contrast, the hyena has a bite force of 1,000 pounds, a lion 940 pounds, a dusky shark 330 pounds, a Labrador dog 125 pounds, and a human 170 pounds. The alligator can snap its jaws shut within 50 milliseconds. The alligator has about 80 sharp teeth. That's more than you and me. And new ones form when old ones fall out. It has tiny bumps on its face that are ultra-sensitive to touch, even more sensitive than human fingertips. Typically, the alligator feeds on fish, birds, and smaller animals, but it can kill larger prey, such as deer and wild boars, which are pigs, by dragging them under the water and drowning them. Gators spend much of their time floating partially submerged with just their snout and eyes showing above the water, waiting for a meal. They have excellent night vision and a keen sense of smell, often hunting at night. The female builds a large nest of vegetation that provides heat for the eggs as it decomposes. The sex of the offspring is determined by the place occupied in the nest and the temperature at which it is incubated. If the temperature is 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees Celsius, or lower, the eggs produce females or girls. And those of 93 degrees Fahrenheit, 34 degrees Celsius, or higher produce males or boys. The mother lays from 20 to 50 eggs, and it defends the nest from predators during the 60 or so days of incubation. At this time, she can be a great danger to those who venture near the nest, as an alligator can run 17 miles per hour for short distances, which is faster than the average human. She will warn away intruders by hissing, thrashing her tail, and chomping her jaws. After the eggs hatch, typically only about half survive, so if that's 20 to 50 eggs, that could be 10 to 25 might survive. But still, that's a lot of babies. The mother will take the 10-inch long baby alligators, all of them, in her mouth and carry them to the water. Typically, she stays with the young for a year. A group of alligators is called a congregation. Pretty interesting facts. All right, here we go. Escape Underground by Clint Kelly. I think you're really gonna like it. Chapter 1. Mara made the worst face she could think of. It was unladylike. But so what? You couldn't be a lady 24 hours a day. It was too exhausting. This meeting of the way was going nowhere fast. People were arguing and calling each other crazy. They sounded like bees in a hive all buzzing at once. There was nothing of interest to kids here, so why did they have to sit in this stuffy, dreary room? "You're full of hot desert wind. The world's not going to end," snapped one. "You dreamer, Jesus warned of Judgment Day, and it sounded pretty close to me," said another, pointing an accusing finger. "That's because you're deaf in both ears and afraid of your own shadow," the first shot back. Mara yawned. She dreamed of being in the market by the Western Temple wall, admiring the fabrics, sampling the perfumes, listening to the clash of languages, soaking up the crowds and the colors and the excitement. Certainly not sitting here listening to the same old men go on and on about the same old things. It was time to do something about it. She arched her eyebrow, a signal to her skinny brother Nathan. He wrinkled his nose at Obadiah. Obadiah tugged his ear at Sarah. Sarah rubbed both eyes. Mara felt a flush of excitement. The members of the New Israel Club were ready. The game was on. Mara always went first. She stared at the perspiring, thin-necked man with the grape-stained fingers. He looked an awful lot like a camel. She turned to the others and pointed at the man. She twisted her mouth into a rubbery, pouty-lipped muzzle. Teeth bared, she began to chew an imaginary cud. The other kids giggled while the men argued on without noticing. It was Nathan's turn. He studied the potter's tight, woolly curls and thick, stubby neck. Nathan turned his head, forced a cough, and stuck out his tongue, mimicking the silent bleating of a stupid sheep. Mara couldn't help it. Laughter burst out of her mouth with all the grace of a busted vase. Unfortunately, the adults chose that exact moment to catch their breath. The sound of Mara's hoarse snort filled the room. Her mother glared at her. Mara's cheeks burned. She was going to get the lady lecture later, for sure. I wonder if the governor's wife ever scratches or burps, Mara thought. I bet she does. The arguments resumed, and after sitting still for a few minutes, Mara slipped carefully and quietly to the back of the room. The other New Israel kids faded back too. She gave them a nod, and they made their escape. Outside, the members of New Israel poked and wrestled each other, glad to be free. "If Jesus had been that boring," Sarah said, dancing away from the boys, "nobody would have listened." "But he wasn't," Mara said in a superior tone. "He told great stories and let kids sit on his lap. I wish he was still here." The others nodded. Jesus had shaken everybody up. sometimes with miracles, but mostly just with words. People couldn't stop talking about him. As soon as they were out of earshot of the adults, Mara gave the signal, and Obadiah placed his index finger against the gaps in his teeth and blew a piercing whistle. Immediately, the others left their horseplay and fell in behind Mara, who led them in the club theme song. We are New Israel, kids of strength and might. Messiah has favored us and given us new light. Don't not get in our way, or we will stand and fight. We stand the test because we're the best, we know that we are right. Obadiah sang it wrong again, Mara, complained Nathan, checking to see that his orange and brown striped cloak had not gotten smudged. His mother had woven the wool on her loom and colored it with special dye. Nathan was very careful about his clothes. Did not, objected Obadiah, his considerable roundness covered by a red and blue cloak. Oh, yes, you did, corrected Nathan. You ended with tight instead of right, like you always do. Look, Mr. Perfection, Obadiah said, what difference does it make? We're right and tight, so what's the big deal? Nathan pulled his matching turban more firmly into place over his mop of black hair. The big deal is that I wrote the song and it's might, light, fight, and right, not tight. Got it? Right, said Mara. Huh? Nathan threw a confused look her way. Right, said Mara again. I think bright is better. It's got right in it, but it says more. She walked carefully, staying in the lead. She was tall for her 11 years, and she considered herself practically a woman. Wise, too, she thought smugly. I like Mara's idea, said Obadiah. We can use tight in the first line. Kids of strength and tight, Nathan sneered. You think about as well as you sing. Obadiah growled. My parents think I sing just fine. That's because your father's a bullfrog and your mother's a screech owl. I wrote the song and I ought to know the right word, and in this case, the right word is right. Mara had had enough. Stop it. It's a stupid argument and you know it. We're not arguing, sniffed Nathan. We're... One look at Mara's face and he realized he'd better not finish the sentence. Mara began walking again, trying to imagine herself away from there. She strode the dark, narrow streets of the old city as if she owned them. Sometimes she imagined that she owned the whole city, every merchant's stall, every official's marbled home, every fine steed in the Roman stables. Her bearing was tall, her chin strong. Her dark eyes flashed with the fire of leadership, and she was beautiful. Her father said so. Sarah's aunt thought she must have a royal branch in her family tree. Mara liked Sarah. Sarah didn't say much. One day, Mara would have the respect of the whole city, for now she was the leader of New Israel. She was proud of their club for true Hebrew Christian kids. The Jewish kids from Greece and Cyprus and other foreign places who had moved to Jerusalem would just have to form their own club. They didn't even speak Aramaic. They chattered away about their strange beliefs in Greek. Mara had to admit that one of the reasons she didn't like them was because the foreigners were the cause of half the arguments in the church. She adjusted the fine white cloth of her meeting dress and patted her pale pink head veil. It flowed over raven black hair that reached halfway down her back. She straightened and felt that she must look regal. Maybe she would be the queen of an entire country one day. Must you walk like an ostrich? Nathan asked. A year younger and 6 inches shorter than Mara, he acted like he owned the rule book. He spent his school days with the teachers of the law called rabbis. Most of the time, he came home sounding like them. Go away, baby rabbi, Mara said. I'm thinking. Nathan did not go away. You need to respect the males of your family. We can teach you many things. Mara patted him on the turban. You barely wash behind your ears. You ought to listen more and speak less. Nathan looked at her with indignant brown eyes. She knew what was coming. In synagogue school, we're taught that female children should master the skills of the home and proper ways of cooking. They should not make fun of teachings they know nothing about. Speaking of cooking, did you finish off the cinnamon flatbread I baked for Father? Mara accused, suddenly suspicious. Someone had to, Nathan shrugged, but his face broke into a sly grin. I couldn't allow Father to be poisoned. Mara looked at him and frowned. I liked you better when you were the size of a squirrel and had the vocabulary of a centipede. Centipedes can't talk, Nathan retorted. Exactly. They arrived shortly at the cool, sheltering walls of the Pool of Siloam. The sweet waters of the Gihon spring flowed through the tunnel that good King Hezekiah had dug into Jerusalem beneath the city wall. The shaded pool made a perfect meeting place for their club. The new Israelites knelt by the pool and drank the refreshing water from cupped hands. Mara was about to call the meeting to order when she noticed someone slouched in the dark recesses of the tunnel's mouth. A shiver slithered down her regal spine. It's K-4th, the river rat. What's she doing here? She thought in annoyance. Ew, what's that smell? I think it's coming from something in that moldy old tunnel, Sarah pointed at the figure in the shadows. Yeah, it stinks like old garlic and rotten olives, said Obadiah. He held his nose and stomach and lurched about as if he would lose his breakfast. K-4th emerged cautiously from the tunnel. Her hands were behind her, hiding something. The new Israel kids shrieked in mock terror. It's the girl from the ground, the brat from below. Yes, yes, it's the dung-hole detective. K-4th's shoulders slumped. She was plain and small for her age. Barefoot, clothed in a shapeless, frayed cloak of drab brown, the girl from Caesarea by the sea had been in Jerusalem less than a year. Mara felt sorry for her in a way. She knew K-4th just wanted to be friends with the new Israelites. She wanted to feel close to the Hebrews who had seen Jesus and heard him speak. On the other hand, K-4th was always boasting about what an explorer she was, how back home in Caesarea she knew every inch, every square inch of the vast underground sewer system built by Herod the Great. She was as proud of poking around in the dark, smelly old tunnels as the Egyptians were of building their pyramids. It was embarrassing. Plus, she tied her dull black hair on top of her head in a sorry little knot, resembling a dead animal. Still, Mara felt a moment's guilt. What if she were in K-4th's place and unaccepted by others, a foreigner? K-4th's family was penniless, supported only by what the church could spare. Well, it's their own fault, Mara thought impatiently. No one had forced them to leave Caesarea and move to Jerusalem, where unemployment, especially for believers of the way, was high. Surely they had relatives they could go back to. Mara had to look after her own. She was the head of New Israel, after all. She was born in Jerusalem. Her father was a respected architect, a leader in the church, and her family had money. God must have wanted it that way. What are you hiding behind your back? Mara demanded, speaking the Greek all the educated Hebrew children were taught along with their native Aramaic. Show us. K-4th, less schooled and unable to speak Aramaic, was outnumbered by wiry and quick. Mara watched her closely. If she discovered something valuable while traveling the tunnels, it wouldn't do to frighten her, or they'd never get to see it. I don't think you want to know what's in here, K-4th said, bringing a rough woven sack into view. You'll never be allowed to join New Israel if you don't learn to cooperate, said Mara. But she was thinking, it'd be easier for you to stuff a camel through the eye of a needle than to get into this club. Mara shuddered. The thought of K-4th climbing around underground through dangerous, scary places gave her the creeps. But she wasn't about to let K-4th get away with saying no to the leader of New Israel. Okay, don't say you weren't warned. K-4th stepped forward and the curious members of the club crowded around. Mara leaned over for a better look. K-4th held her arms straight out and opened the top of the sack. A severed calf's head lay in the bottom of the bag, and its unseeing right eye caught the light so that it seemed to wink at them. Blue flies crawled over the dead face. A reeking aroma flooded the kids' noses and made their eyes water. That's awful, Mara shouted and jumped back. K-4th laughed. Not as awful as a person who sticks her head in the sack before she knows what's in it. That's just stupid. She makes a pretty good point, said Nathan. Be quiet, Mara snapped. She took 2 steps forward and wagged a finger under K-4th's nose. Don't call me stupid, she yelled. I'm not the one walking around with my brains in a bag. It's not brains. Is too. What do you think that calf's got between his ears, sister? The same thing you do. Nothing. And don't call me sister. You're taking that home so your mother can make boiled calf's brains for supper. That's what poor people eat. Mara was sorry the second she'd said it, but there was no way to take it back. A real queen would never speak to her subjects that way, even the strange ones, she thought. Karis looked at the ground. Mara felt a moment's regret. These were hard times for followers of the Messiah. Timon, Karis' father, was one of the 7 men appointed by the church to help the widows and others who struggled. But it was only a volunteer position. Maybe a calf's head for supper was all Karis' family could afford. Mara's embarrassing words hung in the air until she suggested that the club members get going. "We'll have the meeting at my house, okay?" The others mumbled in response and started to leave. "Wait," Karis called to them. "I'm sorry, that was mean. I should have told you what was in the bag first. Do you want to see my new twin goat kids? They suckle your fingers and have the cutest little white circles around their eyes." The new Israelites stopped and looked at Mara. Their faces said they wanted to see the baby goats. She hesitated, unsure of how she felt about this smudged girl who smelled of damp and dirty places. But she was sure of how she felt about baby animals. She loved them. One day she would own a royal game park and raise all the babies by hand. I guess so," Mara said. "Just keep that sack away from me." Karis brightened. "Great, this way." She started toward the tunnel entrance. Mara and the others halted. "Not in there," Mara said. "But the goats are grazed outside the city walls by a friend of ours," said Karis. "Come on, I'll show you." Let's go out through the city gate," Mara insisted. "You're not scared, are you?" Karis challenged. "I can find my way through those tunnels blindfolded." "We're not scared," said Mara, giving Nathan a look guaranteed to keep him quiet. "We're wearing our nice meeting clothes, and we don't want to come home smelling of dead fish." That was true, but Mara knew that Karis knew the whole truth. The new Israel kids were frightened to go underground. The dark, winding passages were tight and smelly. It was too easy to get lost in them. The kids had all heard horrible tales of terrifying creatures and of children who wandered into the tunnels never to be seen again. Mara suspected the stories were made up to protect the kids from accidents. If so, the stories worked. Karis sighed, shouldered her sack, and re-entered Hezekiah's tunnel. "Suit yourself," she said, "but I came this way and I'm going back this way." The words sounded deep and hollow, as if they came from the bottom of a barrel. The dark tunnel swallowed Karis first, followed by the rough brown sack with the calf's head inside. Mara shuddered. Karis could just forget about her goats. Who wanted to hang out with a girl who liked dark places and carried dead things on her back anyway? Next week we will read Chapter 2. Bye-bye.